sure how long it's gonna hold. There's warning lights everywhere. Abort! Abort! We've lost comms. Look out. It's out of control.
Yes, good evening, folks. This is your rocks right here. It is Thursday evening now, 11:10 p.m. And of course, now it's the third month in the new year of 2022, the 10th day, 10th, good old March 2022, 11:10 p.m. Waiting for the magic minute to come in so everyone can make, as they say, trying not to be superstitious or secular, but as they say, make a wish when that time comes around. So if you're not listening now, I'll still put the good energy out to you. Yeah, so a lot's been going on in the world. We know so much that we don't even know what to do anymore. Uh, 11:11, make that wish. All right. And I'm sure most of us right now should be wishing for one thing, and that one thing is world peace, right? Because it's a shame that we have to have the situation of war, fighting, and weapons. So it's affected us. And of course, we've been affected as to what's been going on all throughout the last couple of years. It's almost like we're victims of the situation. And it's unfortunate because I know a lot of folks wanted to do some, keep their jobs and they put in all their investments and so much, and all of a sudden, we were heroes one day and no longer. So what's somebody to do, right? So what I've been doing is I've been writing and sharing blogs all throughout the uh, I guess we could say the word pandemic. In my case, yeah, I was out there helping folks in the sense of trying to tell them the world doesn't have to be all dire in a sense. Of course, we communicate, we listen to our clients, and we help them and get them what they need. Let's say it's in sense of medical, food, right? And if in the occasion they might need kits and stuff, but that's for the safe use. Now, I'm going to give a little history lesson on a few things this evening. One of them being, I'm trying this out here with the screen, so bear with me. Yeah, like, of course, the drug situation. Now, I did cover in the last chat that a lot of the drug and drugs wars, happening in the 80s. It happened a little before, but I would say the 80s, especially when it came to the folks of the melanated persuasion in the inner cities, hooking up with, you know, the, and I'm going to try and be uh, strategic in how I say things tonight, because I could get too passionate. But yeah, the whole integration of other factions, I guess is the word to say, other structures, whether they be even with some big monetary access and or military. A lot of these folks somehow were the ones who, if anything, had powers that be to even be anywhere, right? And make such things like even today we see, we hear so much about, right? Like we're starting to hear by reports about how, gangs, where they get their drugs from, and no one ever cares or asks and says, "Hey, you know what? It can't be possible that these guys just go across the street and get that." You're talking like even like situation that we see with fentanyl, right? I mean, how did it get to escalate so heavily? And I've seen a lot of these folks in situations where they OD, and a lot of it comes from the willful blind eye, and at the same time the lack of education. Because when it was the war on drugs, once again, even a black, nobody could have just had access to that. So we gotta, I felt now at least, yes, I am that child that back in the 19, what is it, the 60s, that Martin Luther King said would played together. I'm from that generation. And here we are, little into the 50 years here and whatnot. We have to give something back. We have to do something. We can't just sit back and see everything just go to waste and go to heck. So, my mission, at least in this journey, with my subscribers, and once I guess I got to throw that in before I forget, uh, please subscribe and hit the like button on my YouTube page, the date, because yeah, it is important to get at least do something. Now, I recall being kid back in the 80s, a teenager, coming of age, and I did, well, if I did mention last time, I'll mention again, it took influences from, of course, your peers. And in my case, well, I grew up in a very multicultural area in Montreal. So it wasn't evident that by the time I graduated in the, say, the mid 80s, 1986, and the jobs were not around. And then we fell into this, not too long, this depression, right? And we were, I mean, back then, at least the hashish and the weed thing, yeah, that culture was still there. But the cocaine and then what became crack, at least in Canada, it was something that still didn't impact as much until even the 90s. So, all of this to say, I feel there's going to be a big reveal as to where all of this is coming from, right? Because we see, we've seen in like 30 years, the only thing it's brought to a generation, and like my generation, is despair and all the death of people, the gangs killing each other, and no structure, absolutely no structure to even do anything for the community. And this went on for how long? This has gone on now. It's still going on. So myself, I wasn't involved in gangs and stuff, but the environment of the times and the era when one was struggling and you didn't have, let's say, enough food to eat, right? Or you didn't even, and back in those days, somehow, I mean, it wasn't all dire, but I mean, you still didn't have enough money to get, even if you got through school, right, to get the lunch in school. That whole thing was happening around the 80s. So for someone, to make, I guess, by family, to make ends meet. Some of them, yeah, they had to sell something that maybe their parents, ironically, that many people don't believe, but the parents had access to, and what the parents were doing, what kind of jobs, right? So that's part of it also. We always seem to like when we go on, on the whole trip about gangs and stuff and black gangs. My thing is specifically just to where that, where and what and the future of where that's going to go. Um, a lot of it, once again, it's almost like in hindsight, the way I look at it, I could say this is one of those, some people say conspiracy, but yeah, it was one of those programs because none of us expected. Like I had friends, right? Who broke up with a girlfriend, right? And it was an interracial relationship, right? And somehow didn't work out, broke up. He didn't have anyone to talk to, but he was really hurt by it. I remember. Not too long after, he, some reason, ended up stealing a car and crashing the car. He survived, but then things got weird because once again, hey, if you had gotten in trouble with the law, especially in the 80s in Canada, being black, I mean, hey, you would have gone right through the system, and that would have been it for you. I myself recall, even with my one of my cousins, and this is all in like 1986, 87. We were just walking downtown, and I remember, like someone came from the force and said, "Hey, the legal force saying, hey, you got to come in and we got to take you in for a lineup." I was with him. I was like, what, 17? And we were like, you know what? Why? And I don't know, by the grace of God, you know, I, he didn't bother to take me in. And I went home and I told my mother, and she freaked and she tried to get in touch with his mother, and the regular. unfortunate spiel. And he came out. He was actually staying at my place. So he was sleeping over that weekend. And so he was in the station for like what? This happened in the afternoon. I remember it was like about maybe 4 p.m. in the afternoon, summer afternoon, 1986, 7. And he came back something like 7 the next morning, right? And he told me, "Oh man, it was weird, like they did the lineup and all these other black guys, like just sort of almost kind of looked like him, but not really." He said there was a lot of, you know, uh, disproportion, right? Like guys like my height, guys like his, all this thing. And anytime one guy came up in the line, they cheered, right? Like all the bros were cheering because they were like, "Yeah, another bro knew another bro." We all knew each other back then, right? So, but when he came out, he didn't seem, for some reason, things weren't really all the same either, and it seemed like it impacted him. I don't like. He told me that part of it, but I don't know. It's almost like like brainwashing system. When you go in, you come back out, and of course, I could believe, hey, especially if you're innocent and you get in there, and hey, it's a different world. It's survival's not the same. If you're not strong, gutted enough, really, and mentally in some way, it's hard to survive. But overall, I've seen how a lot of the origins of that um, behaviorism was condoned and started by the experience of growing up with my friends and my family of color, of course, right? And like myself, yeah, it was a tough time. I was approached to bring in some really heavy stuff, right? And I had to think about it because I was like, the money's good, but I couldn't get into it because of my, uh, you know, belief, like knowing the spirit of my grandmother would not have, been for it. And this is the thing, in those years, a lot of us knowing the struggles of our parents, the struggles that our parents had, it would have been just it just would have been so inappropriate to do such a thing, right? It would have been like most folks, no matter where you come from, right? If you were from Europe, and not to say that it was, and insinuate it was only from, let's say, okay, the white folks that were the ones who were pushing the drugs. No, it was more like, once again, I think bigger money. They always have to follow the money. And, well, okay, some groups had advantage of money and turned the blind eye. When I was growing up, there were some things that also freaked me out. Now, like many of us, a lot of folks don't know, back in Montreal, back at least after the what they call the FLQ crisis in October 70. I was like, what, two? Literally seeing those helicopters fly over, fly above, right? Because they were doing that. This is like 1970, right? October. Long story short, the kidnappers kidnapped the British diplomat James Cross, and Pierre Laporte was one of our M&As in the South Shore. Long story short, they ended up, you know, fatally doing the French M&A, Pierre Laporte, rest his soul, and rest his soul now, James Cross. But James Cross, they let him go in a minute, right? But not long after that, anyways, long story short, that kind of blew over, and that kind of killed the movement, right? For whatever, for what it was, right? And which led into the movement of wanting to separate from the rest of Canada, well, was spearheaded by that movement. However, well, we can look into the politics of what brought it, but like the 60s, they were considering themselves, the Quebecois people were considering themselves uh, the white niggers of Canada, les nègres blancs, as they would call themselves. That's what they used to, and try to take that plight of the civil rights movement, and then at the same time, uh, you had that revolution. I quote, hey, if any bros that did that, even in Montreal back then, that wouldn't have, gone down. And of course, with the Concordia computer science department, my mother went to that, was a student of that program, and that, was once, and that wasn't a, thank God, something that was injurious to anyone. as far as I know, except by the collateral damage. But the thing was, it was to just get good marks, right? That's the difference. Because most of the students, including my mother, and Rosie Douglas, who eventually became the prime minister of one of the Caribbean islands. I don't have it in my head right now, but they just wanted to just work, and I'm sure like most folks in the 60s, that's what it was really all about. Like our parents come from that post-war, Second World War already into a peacetime. All of a sudden, now here we go, right? All of a sudden, it's like we've got to fight for our rights. So not to digress too much, but when I was a kid growing up, and then you had this FLQ situation 2 years later, after that, which was way more extreme. They were blowing up post box and all kind of thing in the streets. I don't know if people really know. It was kind of rough. It's not like it was like some real guerrilla stuff going on. You couldn't get away with that even in the States, right? But this was going on. And then eventually they ended up going to Cuba. And we never heard about it. And then Quebec had the referendum. So in that period of, let's say, the early 70s, 72, 3, 4, 5, and then we had the party at the time, which was the Parti Québécois, that got elected with René Lévesque in 1976. And I remember being a kid, and even in the schools, in my case, in English Catholic school, it was very divisive, right? But most people in the English Catholic school were going to vote like it was a yes or no vote, right? So they were like, no, no. And I remember that whole pandemonium and once again, the propaganda that went out and the divisiveness, right? Because then you had people who were like, yeah, you had, and this is where I at least could say I understood where the Quebecois were coming from as I got older, because the English could be very vehement in how they could treat or did treat the French, and myself going to a English Catholic school, I saw a lot of the um, other European kids, sometimes beat up on a French Quebecois kid, right? And they would say, the same discriminatory type of talk that eventually always was with us as melanated people. They eventually picked up on that whole situation, and the jobs were not there for a lot of them. So because it was really, once again, colonialism, right? And the whole supremacy of that. It was British, and Canada is a British. The Queen is still our head of state. People don't know that. If we have to get into conflict and anything heavy, the Queen has to give the okay. Just a little side note. But these things you could look up. This episode is about sharing, caring, and looking up and getting some information out there. So stay tuned. Stick around here. So going back, right? So by 76, all throughout that time, even after the FLQ crisis, what they called it, right? Le Front Libération Québécois, FLQ. So when that was going down, and then that got cleared up, a lot of the, at the time, mobsters were there. They were running things in Montreal, right? That's why Montreal had that Las Vegas energy. And so this guy, Drapeau, who was the mayor forever, right, from the 50s, eventually got tired of it. And then, he cut it off, he cut it low. And then in the 60s, when all of this stuff happened and you had another young generation of people, well, there you go, right? You had a lot of those people at the end of the 60s and early 70s created this sort of nomadic biker culture, for a better use of words. So that's what happened. And I remember growing up in the 70s, the craziness we used to hear, because then, you had all these choppers coming around the neighborhood, and everybody knew that's where you were going to get anything, right? And then, of course, that made, that was all across province wide. And of course, it was understood in the news of those days, right, in the 70s, that hey, this is what the business was, and it was political, because even then they didn't have that much power. Those biker guys, they didn't have as much power, right? Somebody had to get it from the top. So there you and I told you about the guys like the politicians of the time, right? So yeah, the infighting within their own people happened, and then crazy. I think by was 1978, 79. It was like a lot of killings, man. A lot of whackings out. A lot of people doing stuff. To the you had the mob in Montreal, and then there was like how they retaliated, even between bikers, right? They ended up like whacking a bunch of them, putting cement on their feet and dropping them off in the St. Lawrence, man. That was some wild, grim stuff. You would look at any newspaper in those years, right? And also to add to that, even on the what we call the general news of the day with the Walter Cronkite. I remember in the 70s, man, anything you saw on the news every day, whether it would be Nixon, Carter, Ford, right? Or actually, it's Nixon, Ford, Carter, right? In that order. And then Reagan. Man, it was like, oh, there's a war in Latin America, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Peru, something going on there, all across the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, all that stuff going on. It was like, boom, you knew what to expect. All of that to say, right? So that complex was already in effect when we were growing up as children. So by the time the 80s came around, you could see a lot of, folks were like, well, you know what? They figured out they couldn't keep doing what they were, and they were making money. So who was the next underclass to take over some of that? There you go. They started picking on the melanated people and the bros, especially from the class of, let's say, 1983, 4, 5, 6, because that's when a lot of us who were born then were, getting woke already. We were already getting woke. A lot of us had the afros when we were like kids, and we lost the afros by 1978. There were no more afros. Don't let the media tell you otherwise. I mean, yes, we had it, but follow the timeline of Michael Jackson's hair, right? I know a lot of folks would be like, oh, yeah, we had afros in like or the high top in like what was it, 19? I know they threw in a high top in the end of the 90s. No, no, no. High top was actually more at the end of the 80s. But I digress. We'll get back to that. So by the 80s, yeah, you had, of course, now I'm just gonna go in, let's say, for the chopper guys, right? So those folks had children, and their children that I knew growing up too. A lot of them, if you were back then, hashish, at least back then, was the thing, right? That was almost a cultural thing, like beer and everything else, and hockey, and rock music. Need I say rock music was a big thing too. Growing up in Montreal, Montreal was known to be the place where you would have like all the rock bands, the world biggest rock bands. That was the place, right? Like, yeah, David Bowie. I even went to a Neil Young concert, which was, I think it was Rust. And yeah, you know, don't ask me why. I just went there with a cousin of mine, but it was wild. And yeah, the lumberjackets, the long hair, everybody was on that front tip, right? Even the bros and the girls, the ladies were into that. So by the 80s now, in 1986, a lot of these, uh, I'd say the kids of the choppers, right? That's where we got our hookup. And of course, when we started breaking and that whole movement started, yeah, their kids were down with that too. So lo and behold, that was sort of the origin. And if you hadn't caught my last chat, um, now something did happen after, so we had the election, and then in 1980 we had an actual referendum, and that was the yes no vote. That one is the yes no vote. So 76 party got voted in, and then 80 we had our first referendum, and then that one was the yes no vote, and it was a no. However, the government itself, which had been brand new in 1976, that had just gotten voted in, they were changing a lot of, how we say, the bills. They were making known that, okay, it was their time, which was fair. I never say, hey, I enjoyed growing up in Montreal, Quebec. It was like, not perfect, but for what everybody for a minute did get along. Let's just say that. And so when that happened, then this bill called Bill 101 came around. And this Bill 101 was a bill that was saying, okay, the if you were like in my case, okay, my parents came from the West Indies. I was born, bred, and pilgrim dans le champ, as we say. Là. Je parle français aussi, là. Je parle québécois un peu, là. On va venir à ça un autre jour, là. C'est comme ça que j'ai grandi, là. But when I was growing up dans le champ, as we say in Hochelaga, in the East, my Italian friends, my paisans, I could speak that too, right? By 1980, we started to see, yeah, that stuff was getting in effect. 1970, no, it was 75, 76. Oof. Bill 101, well, if anything, it was on by 1976, right? So it was saying that, yeah, if I was born in Montreal by my parents who were outside of the country, highly likely I would have to go to a francophone school, which, eh, sure. However, it was more of a, how we say, it was this, like, yeah, it was that or nothing. That's what they were going for. So no one really had a choice to say, well, if you came from, anywhere, maybe you did come from Australia, you had a choice to go to a French school, French immersion school, and or an English school. But that there was a lot of wedging in the wheels to not make that happen. So what did happen was a lot more French-speaking immigrants did come immigrate to Montreal, and after 1976, fast forward, you had 1980, and then the third referendum, which was like what 1991, if I'm correct, or two, but it was a while ago, and we said no to that. So just backtrack to when we started to have other groups come and especially between those years, it seemed that that created a new society among what was going on in Quebec and in Montreal. But we were still cool with each other, right? There was no real beef, but politics, as usual, got involved and messed everybody up, right? And a lot of us were that generation. So when the let's say with the drug thing, let's say with the friends I had, the certain, most of the people who are going to college now starting, that was the connection. And hey, especially if you're coming from somewhere where you expect, or yes, you can make a lot happen, but the politics were different. And we were going through a recession and a lot of heavy stuff, right? And that whole systematic racism was in effect. So any bro, especially if you're coming from another country, regardless if you were French, but if you were French, you had a bigger up than the Anglophone because it was a set the province, the city was pushing that, right? So jobs even were not the same, which is cool because it's what it was. But there were like the certain red tapes of, let's say, if most folks wanted to work in retail, yeah, you had to be bilingual. There's nothing wrong with that. However, that, at least from my experience, I can only everything I'm saying here is from my experience, my own personal wisdom in life. God willing, every day, amen. Bless. Uh, like when it came to me, who could speak? Like I said, parler français, je parle français ou le français, comme très bien aussi. They wouldn't consider folks like us worth it because we just English either way. And we black? Nah, we too close. And what, you American? You're not American either. So oh boy, that's a whole other thing. So that's when you had a lot of English bros from, let's say, English islands, and them all of a sudden, next thing you know, they kind of getting into the funny. But like I had mentioned before, they didn't just you know, get into dealing hard stuff like blow like that, right? Because certain people controlled that. No bro I still don't believe any bro, even in Canada, has any control like that. But that's how that started. And yes, so you had English bros, you had French bros, and and then you had your then rivalries. And I'll get into that and then we'll continue with the show. By the 90s, Okay, so now you had the whole gangster thing going on, right? 1996. I myself, uh, to get through, I even one of the last few jobs I had before I left Montreal, I was working as a DJ. However, I was also working in, uh, how shall we say, nudie bars, the Club de Danseurs. So yeah, I was that guy. Yeah, I was that guy, just like you saw in that movie with the DJ there, who's how they call it? Well, one of those. Yeah, you had that. Not Mad Max, Magic Mike, right? But for the women. So yeah, I seen a lot of stuff go down. That's another vlog altogether. But in that whole era, this is like 1990, the early bad boy era, 93, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, when we saw the invention, and the word I use as a hashtag, the engineering of my generation and anybody younger than that, because then the music and the young ladies of that era, that time, even though I'll tell you something, just prior, let's say, to 1989, or no, 1992, it was your Scorpions based strip joint, right? Biker type strip joint. And then once again, I guess with time and immigration, opportunities, right? That's when, at least when I started working, I remember that day when you had, let's say, the biker chicks come in and they're like, we don't like this music no more. And the clients were like, well, you know what? We like this Puff Daddy, because they were down with the girl. And, yeah, and the owners would be pissed. They'd be like, what's with this nigger music, this black music? And hey, the girls were complaining, saying, no, you know what? We're going to bail. We're going to go to the other place that plays techno, right? This is like the 90s, right? They want to hear. So yeah, I was bussing at least one of the first DJs, to start in the 90s, because it was a certain switch, as we say, a change of guard, right? From the old, groovy 60s, disco 70s, even the eclectic 80s, right? Space age eclectic, nah, and the big hair, nah. They were going gangsta, like breaking glass bottles, and this is the girls to the clients, right? Anyway, I digress. But I could say yes, I saw a lot of stuff flow through that in the world of what we're discussing with the situation with people getting high and stuff. And I saw myself being, by then, with the 90s, I was in near my 30s. Yeah, I saw the clientele be younger, like in the sense like it would be anyone's little brother's generation, right? So you had all these like 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds, right, coming in, the girls coming in, right, 25, 20, all this business. And so that generation, forget about it. Forget about it. I throw in what at the time we had ecstasy, which was the rave culture, which was a spin-off of house music, right? Because I could say that I was okay. So in the 80s, I was breaking. I'm a child of the 70s disco. The 90s, I would say, alternative. And so by 2000s, yeah, it was techno, right? So the rave thing, if most of us in that era remember growing up, we followed the cool newer trend. But let's say the little brothers and sisters, they got stuck for some reason. And of course, that was by the monopoly of what became gangster rap and the labels. So when you had Puff Daddy, you had the Notorious Big, you had all of this. Yeah, and Tupac, and then, oh, you want to hear something? I remember, and okay, so when I was working there, right, you had all kinds of girls, but let's say you had the white girls. And I remember when some of the girls would come to me, and man, these kids knew their shit. They'd be like, yeah, can you play me was it Wu-Tang Clan and Pearl Jam, and then I'll give you some of the old sneaker pimps, right? And Rammstein. So what some of these girls took on, like when they wanted to hear, let's say, Money Cash Respect, they had the attitude that went with it for that era. I've never seen so, like, and this is weird. This was not a new phenomenon, because in the 80s, when Michael Jackson came out with Beat It and all that stuff, really, that was the beginning of interracial dating. Don't get that twisted. Yes, it would happen before in the 60s and all through. But when Michael Jackson came out with Thriller, and we started breaking, forget about that. That's when that happened. But by the 90s and the second resurrection, when we had gangster, what? Yeah, the white girls are going off for like two-pack, and they wanted their guys like that. A lot of us were like cool, but we're like, those kids are younger, they're local, but then we saw that they were getting older and they were having babies and they were bringing up babies in that new culture, because just a little before that, yeah, you had it, but that was something that was affiliated more with the other class, like the biker type, that type. And so now it married, into the culture of a lot of potential melanated kings, a lot of bros who lost their life needlessly and all of this stuff. So anyway, yeah, people were down with it, and that's when, by the end of the 90s, that's when the culture, drug culture, the gang culture, the nigga culture, even like, when but okay, by the 90s, we were already hearing the nigga, right? Because that was coming with niggers with attitudes, right? And that whole era. But by the time Tupac and Big and Bad Boy and Death Row, oh my God. And of course, yeah, all of that. Okay, we knew that there was, those guys getting those cars, and when Snoop came out, and they're hot riding, and all this bouncy stuff. We knew, at least most who were informed, that none of those bros owned any of that shit, right? Well, that you know, Tupac owned all that chain and gold, and we were just mystified at how media and propaganda penetrated the minds of a generation right before our very eyes. And this is me, right? I'm 30 some, and it's like, if I'm having children, at that time, I had delivered a baby, and of a friend I knew, and this is 96, and it was a beautiful experience. I had helped, and long story short, on that child and cousins of that child, and even my peers who were on the struggle and had nothing else better to do but work, like literally work. And I saw a lot of people, even like even of our tribes, like my age, and they were working in that environment, either to pay school, right? They went right through university. You know how many people now, how many some of them lawyer, some of them all of this, they had a little job on the side. you know, I tell you, there was a lot, because the business continued even up until the emergency we just had, right? So once again, it's one of those forever old sins, right? What do you call them? The older ones. So by the 2000s now, and here we are today, in those early years after the ecstasy rave, it was still around, but I think it had petered out, because our generation were the ones who were spearheading, let's say, from children from disco, like 60s, and then the hip hop, and then the eclectic ears, and then the electronic ears, and then boom, we had a bust. I would say the bust happened on Y2K, 2000, right? I went to a rave that night. We used to have a place called Sona, one of the best places back in the day. Montreal's a rocking place. I'll talk about the bars maybe on another topic, but I could go there, do a broadcast on the club scene solely about what Montreal, because Montreal rocks, or rocked. When Drapo brought the Olympics, right? We had the Olympics in '76 still, and then we had Man in His World, but that was '67. Yeah, it was a rocking city. So, but by the let's say 2000, then okay, crack was already phew, that was the thing, and then the painkillers. It was heroin that was making a comeback, and guess why? Right? So 1990, what happened? We had uh, the Saddam Hussein situation, right? That whole, as they called it, yeah, they had so many terms. I'm forgetting my history a bit, but yeah, we had the uh, Desert Storm, right? And so once again, even when that happened, a lot of us were coming of age. I had friends, my Middle Eastern friends, my bros from Iran, man. They used to grow up with, we were so cool. Everybody was loving everybody. Didn't matter if you were Jewish or Muslim or anyway, right? So they ended up having to go to those places and they came back messed up. So when that, and even they were like, bro, what we saw there, right? But on the down low, people knew this stuff is all out there. You could just look it up on the internet. Folks know, and that there was a higher level of painkillers, let's say, if we're going to put it that way, coming in, right? To places like America, Montreal, and all the hot spots, and Arkansas, and so on and so on. You can watch all the documentaries, the Gary Webbs, they're all out there, right? But that happened, especially by the end of that. And I start to wonder, and myself, I would say yes, we were all caught up in that. Myself, I did have a very bitter addiction to the substance known as blow. And that was, being in the artist field and it was a spell. I tell you, it's a spell binding type of thing. But luckily, I've been clean and sober now over a decade now. So yeah, thank you very much. And I'll get onto that. There's so tonight's broadcast is really more. I'd say another test because I've been doing this. This is my third one now, so I'm going to try and talk a little longer, but at the same time, I don't want to be too drained out. I just want to share information for you to look at, and of course, uh, get you prepared to look out for my next blog. Thank you for my subscribers. Please subscribe and like, and of course, I'll be on Patreon and Odyssey. I'm liking that. And BandTube. BandTube is for the bros. I really love it, and I'll tell you why. It's one of the first like YouTube like social media places really that is for the tribe, the 12 tribes. And when I say it, it's really for the for folks like myself, black men, which I know people right now. This is also a trend. Everybody loves to hate us, but hates to love us. And but in real, they all love us. So this is a place where yes, you can come in and put your voice out there, and the sisters too. And yeah, I highly recommend it. And I give that thanks to a lot of our streamers. I'm going to pull them up and give them some credit if I could. But yes, groups like Israel United in Christ and and so many others out there that are helping me learn some truth. So thank you, folks. Now going back to that whole. Uh, I would say the OxyContin years, right before the fentanyl came in. This is the 2000s now. A lot of pain. I wondered how is it that folks would be so addicted to painkillers, so because you're all falling asleep and you're just tired. But I started to realize that a lot of it had to do with still either way how things are making their ways into the system. So let's say if people were doing, let's say, blow or getting off the rock, they needed something to come back down. So that's how that snuck in, at least from my observations, right? Because I knew people who were like, okay, they'd be into like little dabble, little little, what do you call them, a little bump or whatnot, right? Or you had some who were like burn us, as they would say. I don't want to trigger anybody, but they would burn that ting, ting ting, stone ting, and then only to end up whew, all the way on something that's you got to bring them back by giving them Narcan. But the positive news, if there's something positive to see in that, I could also say that I do know a lot of folks of my generation. I can only speak that survived and got through that and didn't. And I would say maybe from just the blow to the Stone Age, and the ones that got into more painkiller type stuff, yeah, nah. A lot of them though, like real soldiers though. I mean, I remember some 80-year-old bros, right? And those bros, and sorry to say, but they're bros and they had their hoes and they would come and get their pension money, and what, they'd be knocking off that stuff like cake. But anyway, how did I know? Once again, I worked in the environment. Da, 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 da. So by the 2000s, here we are now, 2012, 2015. we do see a younger generation. So let's take a step back. So what I had mentioned was we had the 2000s Y2K raves, our younger peers, by the Gen Ys as we'll call them, and millennials were starting to be born by then. So the disconnect was already set up after Generation X, right? So you had a lot of youngsters who by 2000s, well, let's say if you were of coming of age, maybe 13 by 2000, right? And you're what, almost nearly 40 now. And any kids who were born as even younger than after 9/11, right? The disconnect happened overnight. So everything that, we're starting to see with the drug problem, that wasn't on the news as much, right? The priorities were shifting. However, even after the attacks, the 9/11 attacks, well, that also brought us back into another a recession, right up until the like 2006, until Obama popped up, and that disenfranchisement put a lot of people on the street. Also, we had the big scandals with what you call them, like the Lehman Brothers and all those you know rich people business, rich people fraudery things that happened big time that put us into that, right? Um, if some folks care to recall, right? But with the whole Enron thing and people like, here's the irony: folks died, right? Blowing like losing their money through these guys, right? But the irony is, didn't like one of the top ones have a really miserable end, to his life? All of that to do that to end up anyway. So that happened in the 2000s. So imagine you're already like so-called middle age, coming from the 60s. You've seen already all this bullshit happening with, and everybody's cool. 1980, what, 82, Michael Jackson beat it. Everybody's dancing together, slow dancing, love is in the air. And then boom, that's over, right? Oh, oil, gas, that's what we're talking about. And then we're like, this is not Leave It to Beaver for us. And it's not the Partridge Family for us. And it's not the Huxtables for us, right? And it's not the Connors. It's none of that. Actually, I remember when the planes went in, the first thing I thought was that was the end of television. That was the end of the television, the sitcom per se. That bubble burst. I even believe, respects to, if I'm correct, David Angel, who was one of the producers of Frasier and Cheers, right, was on that, from that whole situation. And I thought, yeah, all those shows, all those sitcoms we saw growing up, boom, that was over. It even killed the executive producer. So it burst a big bubble of illusion. And then I would say that the early woke years of the 2000 and 2010s, I saw a lot of folks in that whole addiction spectrum. It was like a sort of a, I don't know, like you want to say a post-war vibe, or because we were sort of still in war, looking for these guys, but people were partying again. And by the time I came to Toronto, this is what now 20, what two, I've been already here by 2000. I came here when the whole SARS thing. I guess I could say that, right? That's what it was. And so that was what, 2002, three. So by the 2010s, right, 2015, folks were kind of really exhausted, right? Because you had that. And this is why the history, we don't hear the history. We don't really hear the facts of what, you know. But once again, I don't blame it on anyone. It's just that I'm giving you the timeline. So we're old enough and we're trying to figure it out. So when 9/11 happened, I was already like not even in my 40s yet, right? Not even. I was still in my 30s, early 30s to be exact. So here we go, fast forward 20 years later. I could say I had a lot of growing up to do, like many of us. So imagine anyone who, let's say, was the little brother who might be in their 30s now, or maybe even in their teens, even a kid who's 10 now, who was born, what, is 2022, 2012. That's a lot of stuff they had to absorb. along with being called geniuses, uh, as long also getting rewarded, as long as they were getting rewarded, as long as we weren't disciplining them the way we were told not to discipline them by other people. And then lo and behold, we had 24-hour channels going on TV. This was a long time in the making. That was in the 90s, right? So there was already enough practice to have a full cartoon channel 24 hours a day. Most of us, if any of our Gen Xers could remember Saturday, by 12, this was it. You had to go out. This was it. That was the end of the Bugs Bunny show. That was it. They played golf. You were out of there. Now imagine when by 1990, what, two, three, four, the Cartoon Channel had enough. This already, what, 30 years, right? So you had them kids growing up with that, being weaned on good old Teletubbies. Remember that madness? I remember coming home buzzed out, man. I was high as a kite. Coming home 5, 6 in the morning, seeing that stuff. I remember. Okay, I remember. My friends. We were high. Okay, and this was not just like the psychedelic stuff, man. We were turned, caked, as we would say. And I remember 7 it was daytime, right? Nobody wants to be outside on that stuff. Daytime with your eyes outside. What? You come in, you put on the TV to bring, and you see, what is it? Green, yellow, blue, red, and a sun with a baby's face. I was like, what? I was like, is this real? I said, are kids watching this? Anyway, I think a lot of us felt like that. So here we are today, right? So we can't blame the kids, but once again, it's important to get the history out there. So with that, I'm going to share some stuff. And one of the things I'm going to share here is because I'm doing my blog here. So yeah, I am a product of Martin Luther King. We've had hundreds of thousands that do trust in God to be on the good side of history, right? So I represent the silent majority of the folks that want peace. And that's all generations, all races, if that's what you want to say, or groups, tribes. It's not the same peace that we knew 70 years ago, right? So I'm not right, nor middle, nor left. And you will have trolls and you'll have people who might not believe. I'm not here to make any influence per se. I just want to make sure that folks have a chance to, the folks who, let's say, that I saw when I was growing up. We look back and we say, if somebody had been there back then to tell me, well, this is why I'm doing this, right? Just to show you that, hey, hang in there. It's really tough. It's very tough for me. It's very tough for everyone out there because we don't know where we stand. And we have absolutely, at least when it comes to us as a people, as a Black people per se, because, once again, words, some people they don't want to hear Black, they don't want to hear this, they want to hear, hey, at the end of the day, we're all people, but you see what's going on and you see who takes care of themselves. So, yeah, social media might not be friendly to a lot of folks like us for that, right? So, if you want to break it or destroy it, just do it. There are other platforms, because some platforms will not jive. And we see that happening. But this is why there should be an invested interest in at least creating that type of structure where we could have our own say in our right or freedom of expression and the right to freedom of expression because we're always going to be censored, right? And while censorship might have, it has, solid, good found uh, reasons for existing, we do see that it does work against a lot of folks who try to reveal the truth, no matter how maybe for some it might be too emotional, right? But emotion is also coming from the other side, and we're seeing this right now. So it's much like, which brings me to the big mention. What about the veterans of the Second World War, right? Because these folks, like, they volunteered and they were drafted. I mean, is that how we get to be who we are today. I mean, I think about the disrespect that's going on today with our, with the veterans that went and had to fight. Some of you, some of them were grandparents to you, some of them great grand. But one thing I do recall very well learning history was a lot of the folks that, or men actually, because I'm trying to be sweet in my words, but I'm realizing the men who fought in World War II fought for the freedom, not to say that what we're hearing today, the narrative that no one can be free to live among their own people, but we should be free to live among our own people, among each other. So a lot of brave men went in to battle against this force, and this force was a nationalist front, as they would say, or a nationalist force. And that's the whole thing with Hitler and all that. What they were believing. Yeah, they wanted to be the best race in the world, and that it didn't matter if you were, light skin, dark skin. That was their thing. But we had people, men, who, by the grace of God, even though, America went in late and all of that, right? But all in the beginning, even in their own land, their own country, just like we're seeing today, a lot of those folks had to go and put up a fight. The Warsaw Ghetto. How can we forget that? Because this is what's happening now. Thus, is it happening because, once again, we missed the disconnect that happened after Gen X? So the kids who were into the gangster rap of the mid 90s and the babies growing up watching the Cartoon Channel. And this is not, not to insult and discredit, because obviously I'm sure we had brilliant people who didn't even, watch only the Cartoon Channel and, and only listen to gangster rap of the 90s and all that. However, as adults today that maybe have not gotten the full history or the full true history as to what we did live just as you were born, which they might not realize how close it was. Once you're into that situation and that predicament, it's easy, one, to take control of, as they say, a group with the forces they use, we call think tank, right? It's easy, you could do that. So I have a feeling that that's what's going on now. And the price of that is, once again, we don't even if I'm correct, well, now 2022, right? So the veterans of the First World War, they're probably none, right? Or they'd be probably well into over 120 or something. The veterans of the Second World War, if they were in their 20s then, mm, I don't even know how many are left now. Even the youngest one, who would have probably gone in that service from, let's say, up until 1945. And if you were 18, you'd be up there right now, right? If not in your 90s. And here we are. I mean, what are they saying? And that, once again, it's just sad to see that even historically, we're told to keep the fight. But then, as vicious as it comes around again, we never really do learn anything. Or maybe, I know. One thing that the living people in the moment could say is that, it seems that we're really disconnected to the connections that we did have up until the end of the 20th century, right? Because of the distractions. And that's where we get into the generation disconnection by the psychiatric brainwashing initiation. I've been seeing some articles here, and this is one of them. This one on the shock doctrine. It's written by NaomiKlein.org. And, yeah, when you really take a minute, now folks can say, Oh, well, maybe, it's conspiracy. But if it is, how is it we're able to get such detailed information? And you have to start wondering, even with fact checkers, you're like, if people are so, let's say, because the argument would be, okay, well, we need fact checkers because folks will tell lies or not tell accurate truths deliberately. I don't know. Doesn't that kind of sound like a bit of an oxymoron, right? But in this shock doctrine, in the shock doctrine, Naomi Klein explodes the myth that the global free market triumphed democratically, exposing the thinking, the money trail, and the puppet strings behind the world changing crisis and wars of the last 4 decades. And one of the things I took her, you see, at the most chaotic juncture in Iraq's civil war, a new law is unveiled that would allow Shell and BP to claim the country's vast oil reserves. Immediately following September 11th, the Bush administration quietly outsources the running of the war on terror to Halliburton and Blackwater. After a tsunami wipes out the coasts of East Asia, the pristine beaches are auctioned off to tourist resorts. New Orleans residents scattered from Hurricane Katrina discovered that their public housing, hospitals, and schools will never be reopened. These events are examples of the shock doctrine, using the public's disorientation following massive collective shocks, wars, terrorist attacks, or natural disasters to achieve control by imposing economic shock therapy. Sometimes, when the first two shocks don't succeed in wiping out resistance, a third shock is employed: the electrode in the prison cell or the taser gun on the streets. Hmm. So, that'll be in the post. I'll leave you a link to that. So that might be something to check out because I've been reading about that. And here's the thing, once again, in the Second World War, a lot of these folks, or I would say folks, these men went out there. Even some younger men, like teens, boys, because back then folks didn't have, that's just what it was, right? They went out there, they put their lives on the line, and only to come back and know that even, I'm sure, even prior to that, the whole thing with what was going on with Germany, that too. And I feel we're seeing that today in this situation that we see going on in Europe. One of the things I did pick up through independent, proper journalism and some research is that a lot of this brainwashing, shock therapy thing, this stuff goes back, eh? I mean, to get those guys into the state, okay, politically, that's one thing, but even then, we never hear about the training camp, right? So maybe it was like, yeah, you had to have some type of, because, look, I mean, how many, what, 20 some years later, they come up with the Manchurian candidate. So we should take heed. It's not just people talking, right? The shock doctrine. Yeah, check that out because, there is information out there that maybe this is also part of it. Like these operations being around so long, and here's the funny thing, they keep doing the same type of program. So what I feel is happening now is people are not only finding out, they're also in a weird way like reprogramming their minds. There's such things as veterans that come back and they live to tell that, the whistleblower at their risk, that everything is not what it seems. And the reason why they're able to say those things is only because, well, Either they made good compromise with the people that, you know, did whatever they did, right? You hear stories like that. They'll always let one or two exist, right? Because hey, you know, what good is it to like rub you out, right? Because if you're living proof. So the shock doctrine vividly shows how disaster capitalism, the rapid fire corporate re-engineering of societies, still reeling from shock, did not begin with just 9/11, right? So this has been going on. New surprising connections are drawn between economic policy, shock, and awe. We've heard that before, right? Or at least if you're around, you would have heard shock and awe. That was in the 90s, right? Shock and awe warfare and covert, there they are again, those guys, funded experiments in electroshock and sensory deprivation in the 1950s. Research that helped write the torture manuals used today in Guantanamo Bay. Pinochet's coup in Chile in 1973, the Falklands War in 1982, I remember that, the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, the collapse of the Soviet Union. You know, that really impacted a lot of folks because there's so much to that that's relating to today. And it's only like, what, 30 years? So time is everything. The Asian financial crisis, 1997, and Hurricane Mitch, 1998. Huh. So, from what I'm reading here, active theaters for the shock doctrine. The shock doctrine follows the application of these ideas to our contemporary history, showing in riveting detail how well known events of the recent past have been deliberate. Active theaters for the shock doctrine among them. Okay, so maybe that's part of the answer to why is it today nobody cares about our veterans in the Second World War. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, right? Sad though, because I grew up when I was growing up in in the 70s. Even though it wasn't perfect, I'm one of those kids, like many others, who at that time grew up with their friends whose parents, because it was just they were that age, whose parents were former Nazis, former folks who were part of the, whatever the Russian movements of that time, that whole Stalin. You had, all kinds. Yeah, gangsta, and all of that. You had these people around. So one thing I could say, like, okay, I had this one uh, friend that yeah, they were all up into that whole World War II thing, right? But he was probably one of the most informative, nicest guys I ever met. Because by 1980 or whatever, 1970, they were like, yeah, Schwarzer, yeah, but you're nice, though. You tell me, and they'd be kind of like, you could see the remorse, right? They were like, we were like not smart, like that's why we want our son to chill with you. Maybe not their daughters. No, that didn't happen until Michael Jackson. Don't even go there. But if you were hanging out with them, yeah. And they tell you straight up, they tell you. And you know what? Still to today, I still have a few of those folks around, right? Who are white and they all about that. And they're like, they say, yeah, it's almost kind of like we were brainwashed because we were kids, right? So it's food for thought, right? And what these folks would tell me, and what I've learned is time does give some grace. Now, it doesn't mean you have to forgive everybody for, the atrocities that they might have committed to get to that grace. To have God say, well, you done now? Okay, you're good. Yeah. I mean, I still have a belief that there's got to be a reckoning, or even as what is written as a price for those transgressions, right? Especially when you're breaking one of the, what is it? We always say 10 commandments. It's actually more. I have yet to read up on that, but I think it's like way more, you know. But thou shalt not kill is probably one of the top 10, right? Or thou shalt not murder, because killing, you got to kill a chicken, but you know, you don't really murder a chicken. So thou shalt not murder. Let's see what else we got here. So yeah, check this stuff out. Ah, yes. I was reading this also. Yeah, few American Jews are non-white, but a new poll shows that that is likely to change. So yeah, so this is part of the that, I guess we can say, awakening, because you know, once again, the press and the media always has a narrative. So it's always good when you see some papers coming out with some type of truth. However, it's pretty murky, right? Because it's all the same money. So it's like you can probably get a little information out there that might show you that, hey, we're all together. And then you might get some that are like, well, we need to do a study on it. Or just flat out pure out denial. Looking at a broader definition of diversity, 28% of Jewish adults under 30 years old either identify as non white or Sephardic, following Jewish customs from Spain, or Mizrahi, following Jewish customs of the Middle East and North Africa, or are immigrants or children of immigrants from places other than Canada, Europe, or the former Soviet Union. That compares with 7% of all Jews living in the United States who are 65 years or older. People are finally waking up to the fact that our Jewish community is quite multicultural. Rabbi Angela Bukdal of Central Synagogue in New York City told Pew. Bukdal, the first Asian American ordained as a rabbi, said that making assumptions based on people's race can make Jews of color feel unwelcome. Saying that someone doesn't look Jewish can be off putting to people of color. It makes them feel like a stranger in their own town, like they don't really belong. Several national organizations exist to address issues of racial diversity in Judaism, including Jews in All Hues, Jews of Color Initiative, and the Jewish Multiracial Network. Yeah, so yeah, I guess, you know, the awakening is there. Um, I myself, you know, like learning more with where I come from. You know, this is what it really is. It's not. I mean, if we look into the history, and I'm sure there's enough, plenty new YouTube videos out there showing you that in the end of everything, we're all related. We all bleed red, and that blood comes from the origins of a line that is like our greatest grandparents. That means me, the next person living in Poland, the person living in Spain, Africa, New Jersey, uh, Guatemala, you know, even Antarctica, man. Well, I don't know about Antarctica, but I believe strongly the day, night that the world, or that child, you know, that's born into the world, without that brainwashing of what's being told to them, can accept and learn that, hey, we're all related. Only difference is we have different hues. Now, when it comes to the black white question, if Yahshua, otherwise known as Jesus Christ, was a black man, why would people take it so bad? Well, because there's so much more to that history, and it's also recorded into the Bible. But how we've been reading the Bible, we've been reading it sort of, let's say, colorblind. And now, of course, if you go maybe what 4 or 5 thousand years later, and 400 some extra years later, to if you include what we would call as the buck breaking and the the lightning of the people, and that probably even wasn't the newest thing even then, as much as throughout the history, as we know with Genghis Khan and all of that. But what I've been learning is that a lot of these folks, even in the dark ages, as they called it, were dark skinned or had dark melanin going on. So, and we already know that this whole thing about race, also, we already know that race is an invention of a couple of clowns in a period where they figured, hey, you know what, we can, make money off this and take over the world, essentially. If we want to put it in layman's terms, that's what it was. But here we are today, right now in this moment, 2022, and yes, we do look physically different in hues and colors, white, black. We do see that. But what's hard is to if we could all understand, yes, we are all related, and yes, maybe you do have that dot of black in you. I think that's what the real problem is when I see what's happening in the world in the war. We're hearing about, once again, people trying to be um, independent. But you never hear black people saying, well, we want to be independent to save, just our black people. Anyways, we just don't, we have yet to work on ourselves. But I do notice that a lot of the Caucasians, well, geez, they're trying to hold on to just that. When most likely the reality is that you got more black in you than you want to actually accept. And you're saying, even if you want to be white and you want to be blonde, you know, I think there's a misconception here. When people talk about white supremacy, this is the thing. White should have to be proud of who they are. For fuck's sake, you're who you are. But let's just say, okay, maybe you don't even want to accept that you have lineage. It's okay, though, for others to exist among you. Even if you want to say, well, you're the superior, you're the only, the all-knowing. How do you override the fact that even then it's in your blood? It's like that Jefferson. I don't know if you folks remember the Jeffersons, but yeah, there's a famous episode. I'll probably find it if it's still around. But so George Jefferson, long story short, right, saves this Klan guy from a heart attack. The episode ends where he tells his son, right, after George Jefferson saves his life, he's like, he would have been better off dead. Look it up. So, right, what TF? But this is television. This is television telling you how bad, how much somebody can hate you. They hate themselves, not even realizing that they still got a little bit of you in them. Isn't that what God says? A little bit of Him in you? Anyway, so I think this is the great awakening of today. I believe how this, just the word, has been taken in the context. And then once again, if you look at context and wording and how we express things, even in the 90s, by program, language has changed, right? Today, cancel meant something else, right? Like 20 years ago, it was canceling a television series. That's what you would hear, right? Or cancel an order. Yeah, look at that. Choosing all views and education advocate. So it's not just about a UIC. There's others, right? But so far, those bros seem to have the right. Yeah, and here's the thing. This is why I like what's going on with the Israelites here. in all forms. Yeah, like not all of them are all perfect. Yeah, but you know what? One thing I could say compared to everything else that I've seen through the years of my lifetime, yes, the others were good. You could take for what you want. Yes, I'll admit. Yeah, if we all thought I thought Jesus was white too. Yeah, Caesar Borgia. You know what? There were some good things because the belief system anyway, the belief that I was going to get something or heal myself good, right? But being awoken to the truth of it is doubly good because now I could say, well, you know what? Maybe, okay, that was the past, but it doesn't mean that God didn't understand my heart and my intention. So maybe God's saying, well, you know what? If you're white and you see God, I see my son as white, you don't get the glory. No, I don't believe that at all. However, I wonder if it would be more like he would tell someone and say, hey, look, you see me. Can you accept me? Like, if like imagine a hardcore racist. You always hear that the hardcore racist dies, right? And the next thing you know, right? What's God gonna be saying? What's he gonna be doing there? Right? You know what I mean? All of this when God would have just, shows up black to the person, and maybe and Jesus still loves them and says, hey, you know what? I'm black, but do you accept me? What's the Klan guy gonna say? Gee, I don't know. I did a few lynch. Oh, look at this. Look, your life's flashing before you. Look what you did. Look, you hung that guy in the tree. Oh, but but that's my son too. That's your brother. I don't know if you like me anymore. I don't know if you'd be able to hang here since you hate my son so much. Anyway, I was just going off script. But yeah, so these are the sites. So there's more of us. It's not, because I know right now we see there's an awakening happening. This is that awakening. It's a spiritual awakening, right? I believe with the covenant of those who, the drill, those who say they are and are not, right? So that's part of it. It's more than just doctrine, I would say, and ideology, and that Bible, that Torah, those books, which are many of them, probably more you know, than we're told every day. They're telling us something that's not extremely left or right, but tells us that we're all in this together. So this is coming out now, right? And there are some folks, I'm sure, who are going to be like, we can't let this out because we'll lose power. Instead of just shutting up and saying, look, maybe we should turn over a new leaf. No, they're all about it. They want to be right and right. And I guess that's what you see, and you say that's what that devil is, right? They just won't give it up. Ah, so this is another one. The College of Arts and Sciences, Jewish Studies, black, white, and Jews all over. Oh, this was a few years ago. But it's always good to look at these things because we always need to get some reference, right? Because we're always like, hey, the news tells us it's got to be this. And I don't want to disrespect the newsman, but if you guys are going to make money, you're going to have to bring folks like me back instead of blacklisting and keeping it up from you and, block, what do you call it, blackballing. And that stuff is going to only work against what we used to love. Together forever, the strange and storied alliances between Hindus and Jews, India and Israel. Yeah. Abstract. Operation Solomon, when Israel airlifted nearly the entire population of Ethiopian Jews into Israel over 2 days in 1991, is called a miracle. And one of Israel's proudest moments. But 20 years later, Ethiopian Israelis occupy a significantly lower social and economic position than the average Jewish Israeli. They regularly face discrimination in employment, housing, religion. The Israeli government recognizes Ethiopian Jews as Jews, but does not recognize their religious practices as Judaism. Fraught history with blackness, but they finance the airlift. No, that happened when 2017. Carrying on, before we wrap this up, 'cause it's been a minute, and I know I've been rambling on. And if I am, I'm sorry. I just gotta try to figure out this whole thing. But I hope I brought up some good points. And once again, thank you very much. And feel free to subscribe. And I appreciate the ones who have. My subscribers, send me some, as you say, send me some love. I'll send it right back. I'm trying to figure out, hey, how do we monetize? For me, it's more about the truth first. And I believe in the power of three. American Revolution 2. Right on. Yeah, this is cool. Actually, I highly recommend because, we were talking about this, okay, the doctrine of supremacy and this thing of, if you don't have, what do you call it? Blue blood and the one drop rule and all this madness, right? When we're all together in this. And this is a perfect example. I don't think that gets enough talk, enough exposure. We are really at a time where we see a lot of this old nationalist supremacist movement, coming around. But where are actually the cool bros out there, the real young patriots who are with us in this? And I have a few thoughts on that. I believe there does exist folks who are on board with, you know, it's not even about destroying, taking down, breaking, and coups, but you just want to live in peace, man. They just want to be able. That's it. Nobody really comes into this world saying, "I really wanted to be here." And so I get the feeling that we have a lot of folks today who are just scared and too comfortable, and that's not just white. You got blacks too. Once again, maybe because of the programming and the subliminal shock therapy we've been through. Like, look at these guys here, the Panthers and the Patriots. And you have to wonder, and this is like, going back to when the Gen Xers like myself who were born just then. That stuff, we had a real good whiff of that because our parents were there, right? And it was like we saw with our eyes at that time, in real time, literally, the effectiveness of what civil rights was supposed to be. But yeah, as children and whatnot, we forgot, right? By 1976 and distractions, right? Sitcoms dictated these guys. Sitcoms, right? But look how cool they look in the sense that, hey, they these are white guys, white folks who are saying, you know what? We got a similar story to these folks. So much to the point that, yeah, you know what? They actually accept that they got some melanin in them. They got the drop of this bro in him. He's cool with that. Maybe not everybody's all down with it, but this guy here too. Same thing like the Young Lords. See, the story of how a group of poor whites in Chicago united with the Black Panthers to fight racism and capitalism. Heavy words, right? So they called it a conference for a united front against fascism. Take a look. Just before we go there, they used to call it Hillbilly Harlem. The young patriots sprouted from the neighborhood of Uptown, a dense slum filled with poor whites that had migrated from the rural South after World War II. Most were fleeing Appalachia's dying coal industry, and they brought their culture with them. Confederate flags hung in the bars. Country music spilled out of the pool halls. By the mid 60s, the local papers were referring to Uptown as Hillbilly Harlem and portraying it as a den of crime and depravity. Hey, Thurman, yeah. A lot of these guys are probably up in their age now, but once again, his page don't exist. But yeah, organizing against harassment, the same spiel. The original Rainbow Coalition, right? So we talk a lot about what it is today. And today, unfortunately, doesn't represent what this was about. It's been hijacked. Even like, and I don't think anything like this, something for like this to happen again, first of all, would have to be done on the down low. And you would literally have to like screen on an oath of one of, like on a blood oath, not to get it messed up. Because you know what? Even as you see what's going on across Europe, that's how a lot of these people roll, yo. They're like, yo, we got to do this, roll it to the death. But then the media will come and say, well, these guys, that shouldn't have happened. But they're all for it. National Revolutionary Conference for a United Front Against Fascism. So I'll take a look at this. How much more do we have left? Not much. I'm literally, as we say, I'm just sharing the information, but these are things, yeah, you might want to check this out also on PBS, the First Rainbow Coalition. So I'll have those links in the post. Oh yeah, I wanted to cover this. Yeah, the Poitner Institute. Speaking of shock therapy, the Poitner Institute for Media Studies is a nonprofit journalism school and research organization in St. Petersburg, Florida. The school is the owner of the Tampa Bay Times newspaper and international fact-checking network and operates. So I always like to look up who these folks are. And so this is good to know, right? Only because, we get our news and I'm not gonna say, oh, fact checkers are bad and all. I mean, there's got to be a reason why, they exist now to help us with our history, right? Make sure that they get it right. So this will be coming out shortly. I'm calling this episode Shango. Why? I'll tell you why. Shango, Yoruba language, Sango, also known as Chango, Zango in Latin America, and Jukta Bade is an Orisha, a deity in Yoruba region. Genealogically speaking, Shango is a royal ancestor of the Yoruba, as he was the third Alafin of the Oyo kingdom prior to his posthumous deification. Shango has numerous manifestations, including Era, Agodo, Afonja, Lube, and Obamin. He is known for his powerful acts. He's considered to be one of the most powerful rulers that Yoruba land has ever produced. In the New World, he's synchronized with either Saint Barbara or Saint Jerome. Sango was the third Alafin of Oyo, following Oranmiyan and Ajaka. He brought prosperity to the Oyo Empire. And yeah, so there's some research to look up there, right? Because he was an Orisha pantheon. So the Orisha are spirits that play a key role in the Yoruba region of West Africa and several regions of the African diaspora that derive from it. Right. So this African diaspora regions, Caribbean, Latin America, Southern United States, right? Traditional African regions, right? That's where they come from. Such as Cuban, Dominican, Puerto Rican, yes, Santiera, and Brazilian Candomblé. The preferred spelling varies depending on the language in question. Orisha is the original spelling coming from Yoruba language. Yeah, so according to the teachings of these religions, the Orisha are spirits sent by the Supreme Creator, Olodumare, to assist humanity and to teach them to be successful on Ai, Earth, rooted in the native religion of the Yoruba people. Most Orisha are said to have previously existed in Oron, the spirit world, and then became Inromoli, spirits or divine spirits being incarnated as human on earth. Irunmoli took upon a human deity, a human identity, and lived as ordinary humans in the physical world. But because they had their origin in the divine, they had great wisdom and power at the moment of their creation. Hmm. So it's all about how you live your life on earth once again, you know? The Orishas found their way to most of the New World as a result of the Atlantic slave trade and are now expressed in practices as varied as Santiera and so forth. So, as you see here, got a lot of information. But I just wanted to look into this only because when we do speak about even going with the Bible and the Torah, you know, there's so much information even then that we don't know because when you see like with the folks existing in Aruba, right, and the Orishas, I'm sure there's elements even in what we're reading that come from the Bible, right? Because these folks are literally, I say the sort of, is it reincarnation or is it incarnation? But you see the spirit of them coming and or actually coming through someone who's conscious and woke that they came here as to live in such a way. It's something to definitely look into, right? Because there's so much more than meets the eye. So yeah, it is now 12:47 a.m. and it is now the 11th of March, 2022. And we're just gonna wrap things up slowly, but yeah, these are just some things that I would highly recommend to do some research and take a look. I got two more subjects here. I just wanted to check in just before I'll show you a couple of clips and I'll finish with a little scripture. I'm not one, I'm not a pastor or a priest or any of the sort. I am a person, a human being in this world with the experience of growing up in the other religions, such as Catholic, Protestant, Pentecostal. Um, Many of them, I can always say, help me in my time of need. Now, today, because I've accepted to learn more and see how a lot of the influencing does not necessarily come from what we are told to read or believe or from the people, I feel I take it upon myself to interpret it the best way I can, even with some well scripted teachers who are able to decipher the truth, no holds barred. So, one thing I was looking at here, Africa 2050, realizing the continent's full potential. So now we're into the spirituality of things, and here we are. We're all saying we're getting woke to the fact that okay, we are the roots of the 12 tribes and all of this, the spirituality, whether it be Israelite or Orisha, and all of it boils down to see once again if we can unite. So I checked out this site here, and I see Africa 2050, realizing the continent's full potential. This was in 2014. Well, this was like a publication. And I heard about it before and I was like, what's it all about? So let's see. In June 2013, JICA, which is JICA-RI, released a report titled Development Challenge in Africa towards 2050. At the side event of the 5th Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TCAD-V, the report is a collective work between Jikari and the Centennial Company Limited in the United States in January 2014. A book based on this report, a compilation of the vision in various fields for Africa in 2050, was published by Oxford University Press. So, the report predicts that Africa will encounter burgeoning population and accelerating urbanization towards 2050, thus creating jobs continuously to absorb the redundant labor force will be a key factor for the stability in economic and social order. Africa's current economic structure, counting on fossil fuels and mineral resources, are capital intensive, which can't expect to create many job opportunities. The transformation of economic structure in Africa will be crucial will be a crucial challenge to keep sustainable growth, as well as to utilize the private sector. It is hoped that each African country will shift the economic structure to a more sustainable one while developing market and investment climate where the private sector can thrive, as well as systematically fostering human capital by enriching educational health services. So this looks interesting, right? Got these chapters here. Realizing a continent's full potential, a vision to meet African aspirations, prosperous people, cohesive societies, jobs to transform. So this might be something to check out, but I don't know. We got so much brilliant minds out there. You just have to kind of take a look and research. Like this one. I'm not even going to read this too much. I'm just going to let you guys look into it. I'll just say we need to get ID right. ID is vital for political, economic, and social. Whoops. Join the Good Health Pass Collaborative. Okay, let's go back. Uh, what systems of identification are archaic, insecure, lack accurate privacy protection, and for over a billion people, inaccessible. We need to get it right. Alliance partners share the belief that identity is a human right and that individuals must have ownership over their own identity. I don't know about this word manifesto. Isn't that public intention? This word manifesto. Just wanted to check that for a second. So the manifesto is I'm just scrolling this for a second here. Let's go backwards. I don't want to read too much of it, only because, I don't want to get people to get too touchy. But I just want you to take a look. And it'll be in the link, actually. I'll add this in the post that should accompany this vlog. But this is just something to look at, right? Because I believe this is part of what has happened, if not is actually still happening or has already happened, and and or they're trying to make it happen. But this is something to look into. It's always good to know your sources, right? Just like you can have fact checks. Yeah, we can have simple checks, I guess. Everybody checks. So this is my Patreon. Actually, I was trying to set up the okay, I won't leave. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to do this simultaneously, I guess. Like get it on this, get it on at the same time. But Let's see. Can I? Uh, I guess because we're actually still recording. So yeah, I'm at the same time I'm doing this vlog. I'm testing. So just to see how we can make the next page better. Stay on the page. Okay. Because I'm actually StreamYarding this. So I'm trying to see, when I go into Patreon, it's like, okay, you gotta start the unlisted stream, and it's a little weird. I don't even know myself. Am I even on this thing? I don't know. Save. But yeah, I'll figure it out. But right now, StreamYard seems to be the way to go. And of course, as you see here, this is the channel, Motion Hustlers, Pictures and Publishing. I call it that because, yes, we are hustling the motions of the camera, and how the emotions mix you up, and the publishing. So it is motion, pictures in motion, your emotions. So we're all about that. So if you ever pop by my channel, can I just see? This is the dashboard. There we go. So this is it. Hey, look, I'm live. Right on. So yeah, it's all good. And like I said, this is the beginning. I might not get any views. I might get some. I believe in, once again, it's always about that one person out there who wants to hear something. And so far, I once again I appreciate the people who did tune in, and hopefully you'll hear more because I just want to get the truth out there. And if I could do a little something that, let's say, we can give back to the next generation, so they can't, we can't say, well, we didn't do nothing, right? And even the generation before, like the boomers and all, they're still trying. They're not going out without a fight. I know there are some folks like that. However, it's really up to us. And after us, it's really up to the next young people out there that are growing up seeing what's happening. I have some faith though, because I believe, once again, that whole mind shocking, brain shocking, electroshocking thing, in a way, it's actually coming through what we see with social media. But at the same time, I believe folks can be more woke than that, than we give them credit for. So yeah, I'll put all these links in here, and that way you'll see it hopefully see it in the final page up to date. So let's take a quick look here at these. I'm just gonna just copyright disclaimer. I'm just gonna show a couple of clips, just to leave you with a little hope, because I know it's a little difficult to feel like, you know you have a chance in this world, right, with everything, and especially if you're someone of color, specifically if you're a bro, right? It's like, man, is it even worth? And I guess I could say, for now that we're here and we have the free will and the youth still to make a difference, well, by all means, why not? If it didn't kill us, it made us stronger. If it was through hell we went through and kept going, well, I guess like those Orishas, we got to do something, you got to keep going. And like the Israelites, you got to, I guess, try and follow the good rules. All right, so that was fun. Getting a little history in there as usual, folks. And showing you a bit of the past. I'm hoping the sound's coming out good. Once again, I'll hear this after, as this is once again this is a straight off the cuff live vlog that I'm doing. Actually, it'll be pre-recorded and sharing my thoughts here on this Friday, March 11th, 2022. It's now 1:05 a.m. and we're just about wrapping up. So this is your homework. And as we see here, I just want to conclude, like I said, a little bit of the scripture here, because I'm learning. And I did mention I'm not no priest or pastor, but I am a student in God's eyes. So Romans 3:10 to 22 in the New International Version. I wonder if I should get the King James. Let's go for the King James. Let's go for the bro. So, as it is written, Romans 3:10-22. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks after God. They have all turned aside. They have together become unprofitable. There is none who does good, no, not one. Their throat is an open tomb. With their tongues they have practiced deceit. The poison of asp is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. God's righteousness through faith. But now the righteousness of God apart from the law is revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ to all and on all who believe, for there is no difference. Well, for me, that basically says keep the faith, but know that by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. So God knows everything. You can't hide what you're doing, right? I guess that also goes, no, it's not a guess. That actually does go directly to our world leaders. Because right now, like I said, if you look at the timeline, if you stick around enough to see the timeline, how things play out, you know this can't last forever. And I believe that's how why we see a lot of these folks trying to whip up all this stuff because and I get it. Some people are not going to agree, and but I'm not here to care about that because I was one of those guys that used to care so much. And I feel a lot of people used to be like that. You care so much and you give, as you say, and only to be told that you mean nothing or you're worth nothing. Just like I said in the beginning, I was working with folks, everything was good, just kicking in my 50s here, put in nearly a decade, and boom, you guys shafted not only me, but many of us hairs, melanated people again. So what do we have to lose? You already see folks losing lives and everything. The only thing we have to do is we got to speak up. At least because I believe, therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin. All right. So I mean, I don't want to get too big on it, but you get the premonition. It's now 1:11 a.m., March 11th, 2022. This is Year Rocks, wishing you a very good, safe weekend coming in. And God, please make this a better world for everyone today, for every baby that comes into this world, for every person that has nothing to eat, no place to sleep, dealing with traumas and addictions from past to present, pains, aches, illnesses. I pray that you heal everybody tonight because it's been quite a month, quite a year too, so far. So, with that, I say in Jesus' name, thank you, Yahshua, for blessing me. And once again, folks, if you want to sign up, I'm just getting the gist of things here. And I'm having fun. I just basically came on this, just with like a chill vibe, just to see. So once again, I won't apologize for saying talking, but or if it appears I'm rambling because I feel like I am, and it's a weird thing because you're not just getting people online right away, but I know it'll get better. So once again, thank you for the thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Motion Hustlers, Pictures and Publishing, otherwise known as Eurox. Bless out. Have yourself a very safe, good weekend ahead, and may God bless all of you.